Thank you. I tell you, we'll get to see our photos later, but we'll move right into our next last session. We have three speakers from Ministry of Environment, Deborah Su, who will be talking on from the government's perspective on the issue of sustainable logging, NatureFiji on the biodiversity perspective, and the industry perspective from Mr. Ashiana Hassan, the Manager Operation for Fiji-Pi. We are grateful to our speakers who have, it's going to be a really good session just to hear from the different perspective from the policy to biodiversity and the industry. So if I can invite Debbie to please present your presentation. Debbie?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear and see my screen? Can you hear me? See my screen as well?
Yes.
I'm putting into presentation mode now. Maybe I'll just
yes, on the screen, Debbie.
Okay, so yes, I'm just the director for the Forest Resource Assessment and Conservation Division, and our PS is trying to join as well. Our conservator is also on the line, so I'd ask them to be on standby to help with the questions and answers, please. So about mainstreaming forest biodiversity into the economic sector, there's much that we need to develop. And so first, we have our permanent forest estates. That's just to make sure that we actually have a resource base. So there are various components of this, and I'll go into this in a lot more detail after this particular slide, but there's a lot in this slide, so I'll take you through it slowly. So part of our PFEs are our high conservation value forests, as well as our plantations, multiple use forests, and then in development, we have food forestry, and still a concept in concept phase is our urban forestry. We also have our large afforestation, reforestation program for the next 15 years or 14 years now. And this is how we plan to add on to our permanent forest estates in all the sectors. And we're trying to get to sustainability. And how are we going to get there? It's through a big fat arrow, but in that management is key. Management of our forest resources. And this might seem quite obvious, but in actual fact, most of our native forests in Fiji is not managed. And so we're losing it. So we need to give back more to our resource owners to make sure that they're involved and to manage for all the products and services that we get from our forests. Financing systems for this includes the payments for forest ecosystem services, for biodiversity, but also intrinsic in that is for water and carbon. And our RED Plus program has been active for the carbon as for the last 10 years, 11th year now. And also we have something about water, but we still need to put more value in it because, you know, what do we pay at the end of the day for the water that comes out of our taps? Also to build up trusts and bonds, debt for nature swaps are other ways that we can engage with people. So Sovi Basin has a trust fund and we can use that as an example. Because forestry is a very wide sectorial sector, and I think we need a governance review from many different sectors and everybody together. I couldn't put everybody on this slide, but all these different sectors impact forestry in various ways, in good ways and bad ways. And in this especially this last year, I've been hearing a lot of the sectors are working in silos and we have to collaborate together. So underpinning this all is that we need our scientific research, specifically, especially into native species. And this way, you know, we need to discover how to make them grow faster in plantations so that we can have mixed species plantations and especially mixed native species to more mimic nature. so that eventually we'll have our permanent forest estates, a high conservation value forest, happy communities that are happy to expand on the forest and also to safeguard their forest for high conservation values, happy forest workers to undertake all this work as well, and contributing to a vibrant forest trade in products and services, and basically at the end of the day, to get our forest-based bioeconomy. So broadly speaking, without the agroforestry and the urban forestry, our permanent forest estates is in these three main categories of high conservation value forests. And I'll go into a lot of those in a lot more detail in the slides coming up. And there's also forest plantations and multiple use forests. So a high conservation value forest, it's Oslo-Viti level, Wano level, and Tabiuni. And I'll go into each of these layers as well coming up. But altogether, it compromises about 36% of Fiji's land area. Although please bear in mind that a lot of it is fragmented. But if we manage to achieve this, we would already get our target by 2030. So in this is our upland rainforest. So as you know, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but we get our southeast trade winds from the southeast direction, and most of it falls on the wet side. And then the dry clouds go over and there's no more rain left for this side, but they do get some rain in the rainy season. And this is about 600 meters, 650 meters that we start to get our upland rainforest. About 800 meters or so, plus or minus 100 meters, there's a cloud forest, and they're crucial in our water cycle. Without it, we wouldn't get much water. Without forests, basically, we wouldn't have water. And it's not only us, it's about all the plant life in Fiji as well, because everybody needs water, everything needs water. So we also have our PAC protected areas. PAC is a protected area committee. It's a subcommittee to the National Environment Council with the Ministry of Environment. And so the committee have a number of, and sorry, I'm just presenting for Viti level because this is where you can see the altitude and all the different layers. The other islands don't have as much altitude. So the red ones are what we have existing already, like Sobi Basin, the Upper Nauvoo Conservation Area, and the Garrick Reserve down here, and various other forest reserves. The Lisu was there. And then the proposed ones around the country. Nature reserves are also included in our high conservation value forest. So this one is just showing Tomanivi, but there's Wambu right beside it as well, and Tabiuni. Key biodiversity areas play a big part in this, as well as our important bird areas. So some of these overlap exactly because these are KBAs because of the bird species that they have in. And I believe this is under review very soon. So Nunia can tell us more about this. She's up next. Mangrove forests are also important for many, many reasons, especially for coastal livelihoods, as a lot of the species that are on the reefs actually have their nursery time in the mangroves. And the mangroves are forests, and there's a whole suite of communities that live there to make up the forest ecosystem in the mangroves. So in forestry, we also protect 30-degree slope, although in our harvesting code is also above 25-degree slope. We consider that it starts to get serious, too steep for forestry activities, not only for erosion, but it's also OHS issues. And yeah, so they're all over the place, these little green dots. Altogether, as I mentioned, this makes up about 36% of Fiji's land area. Forest plantations. So typically we have Fiji pine and Fiji hardwood have been our long established plantations. These are exotic species, and I'd love to see more native species plantations. Multiple use forests. So these are all the forests that we've identified and analyzed satellite imagery. Now, these are areas that are not conservation areas, so hence these areas are not included in these multiple use forests because they're plantations or they're agriculture, and they're also where people live, or the non-green areas. So obviously they're not forest areas, but we're trying to also expand into agriculture areas with agriculture through agroforestry for many different reasons. And I'll also go into that a bit more detail soon. For governance side, well, historically Fiji, and I think now we have seen most places in the world, there's natural forest exploitation. In Fiji, we've had the annual right license, or right to log license, and we don't have a forest manager in our natural forests. The Drawa block is an exception and has been developed as a model for Fiji. But historically, we have our National Code of Logging Practice that authorized anything above 35 centimeters at diameter breast height is loggable. And also the FDB loans, the loans that we could get from the Fiji Development Bank would have needed to be paid back in 10 years. So although you can get something for forestry, but it's for forest extraction, it's for log extraction and not establishment of native forests. Because by the time, like if you had a loan for a nursery and to establish a forest, you'd have to pay that back in 10 years. And in 10 years, our small trees of the not even teenagers, they're still babies, maybe you can just get some thinnings from them. So you couldn't possibly pay that back in 10 years. Although an agricultural farmer can get everything funded from their houses to seeds. And anyway, we saw this as, at the end of the day, it's a conversion policy, forest conversion policy, but it's not only Fiji, it's everywhere. So as we started to progress about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we developed a rural land use policy and a Fiji forest policy that included the establishment of our permanent forest estates. It's passed by cabinet in 2007. I was in the ministry about 15 years ago as well and developed our Fiji forest certification standard. And as well, we had a revision of the National Code of Logging Practice, and it is now the Fiji Forest Harvesting Code of Practice with the diameter limit table. That's a prescription for extracting or selecting trees in a native forest, and the selection is to maintain the structure and composition, the natural structure and composition of the forest so that you can still fulfill your natural functions.
So just a reminder on your time.
Okay, I shall go faster. We have the RED Plus policy. For example, there's a bit about protected areas, and we have something on conservation, agroforestry, but what about having our rural land use plan implemented? So trying to get to sustainable forestry again, and I've been through that bit, but our progress from natural forest exploitation to sustainability has been a bit up and down. Sometimes you get all excited about a project and then the project dies and then everything drops and then a new project comes and it's frustrating and we're not reaching the end. So this is the agroforestry example. And some of my colleagues would have seen it just not that long ago, actually a couple of days ago, but it's about food forestry. And it's about mimicking the natural forest ecosystem, but with food, for example. So you'd have your big trees, maybe there'd be windbreakers, or your smaller trees that you want to harvest from. Our yasi does very well in this system, and so bamboo in there. Also compost, kava is included possibly, and we want to have demonstration sites for this around Fiji in the different weather and climate zones. so that people would be able to see what they could possibly have in their home gardens or their community garden. Because that needs to have itself, it needs to be self-sustaining. So people would come to see what is possible, and they would grow well in their areas, and then hopefully want to buy something to take home to grow themselves. But what does one actually do with the products? What is the main incentive for all of this? So, and what, when they get their products, what do they actually do with them? So there's also a processing center and perhaps a bakery as well that sells things, whatever that is made from that, and also a cafe. Now, the cafe would be my main incentive, because I love to try different things. But also, and having an on-site cafe, it could be risky at night. So there's also possibilities to have small and medium enterprise food trucks that can go to a variety of events and also be parked in a safe place at night. So an information center, naturally, as well as the participation of the homeowners and communities. And so whatever that they grow at home and produce at home, it's up to them whether they utilize everything themselves or they sell things themselves. But there's also an option to sell back to the processing center. Like if they don't even have a blender at home to process the fruit, they could sell it, they could make their products to standard and sell back to the processing center or for use in the bakery, like uto flour. I've heard so much about uto flour, but I've not eaten it yet. I know it's available in Taveuni and it's available in Ba, but I'm in Suva. And so, and I want to try those goods as well. So basically in the urban setting, what can urban forestry do? Well, it can give us wealthy and fairer communities in places where people want to live and work, attract inward investment, and create green workspaces for healthy employees. Especially during COVID times, outdoor work is quite precious and also great for our mental health. We'd have stronger and safer communities because you get to know your neighbors and build up confidence skills. They'll be safer, healthier communities also, spending more time, not only the workers outside, but to make our parks nice for us so that we have places to relax and unwind, and also to play outside. I think children spend a lot of time indoors these days, and we need an outdoor space. I manage the Lesuva Forest Park, for example, and it amazes me that even on really rainy days, even like today, there'd be people wanting to go into the park, and they do go into the park. So greener communities, to grow our food locally, but also to have our green networks. So possibly, if we have bike lanes, so contributing to climate change mitigation and more sustainable ways to travel and to address NDCs. There's a growing cycling population now. And so it's a lot more reassuring when you have a barrier of trees or foliage between you and the traffic, as well as to help purify all the fumes coming from the trucks and buses and so forth. Green infrastructure. So if you have too much water, I'd suggest planting trees. And also if places are dry, you could also plant trees to shade the soil and to shade yourselves, but also manage your sustainable drainage systems and flood management, improve air quality, and adapt to climate change, I mentioned already, but especially supporting biodiversity. So our smarter communities would be environmentally educated and connecting people with the nature, the lifelong learning about growing plants. It doesn't occur naturally for me, but it's a lifelong skill that you don't forget. Training skills also build community skills and confidence, and eventually would have more environmental engineering, volunteering. So Binakavakalevu, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you for presenting the ministry's, congratulations to the ministry's work on the permanent forest, the multi-use, and the high conservation forest, and some exciting work that you're doing on the urban forestry that some of the participants are already congratulating the ministry. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next speaker, Ms. Nunia-Thomas, Moko, the Director of NatureFiji-MareqetiViti. So if you could unshare your screen, we'll pass it on to Nunia. Nunia, if you could just say hello on your camera, and I'll share your PowerPoint.
Thank you, Etika and Bulo colleagues. Just for the purposes of reducing the risk of losing my internet connection, I'm going to turn off my screen, if that's okay with you. Thank you. And Etika, if you could facilitate from your end on my PowerPoint.
Okay. This is your PowerPoint. Okay, Nunia, your PowerPoint is on.
Thank you. In his in his address to open the virtual action track 3 National Dialogue on Boost Nature Positive Production on Wednesday this week, the Permanent Secretary for Environment, Mr. Joshua Wycliffe, said, and I quote, "Biodiversity underpins the delivery of all ecosystem services on which humanity depends on, and to achieve nature positive food production system, we must adopt practices that protect, manage and restore nature while gradually meeting the fundamentals of human rights to healthy and nutritious food for all." Dear colleagues, friends and mentors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event to commemorate the International Day of Biological Diversity. I'm here to represent NatureFiji-MareqetiViti, Fiji's only local membership-based biodiversity conservation organization. We not only contribute to scientific data about Fiji's biodiversity, but we also translate it into language that makes it useful for policymakers and local communities for informed decision-making. We are also the local partner for BirdLife International and Botanic Gardens Conservation International, from whom we receive technical expertise and assistance on our species and ecosystems program. I think a next slide, please. The previous speakers had highlighted how biodiversity is an important component of rebuilding soils. We also know that a diverse biological system is important for resilience to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. Deb just talked earlier about the concept of permanent forest estates, high conservation value forest, and sustainable forest management. Today, I hope to supplement and complement all that has been presented, previously presented, by giving some case studies. Much of what I present today is the culmination of projects that we implemented from 2009 to 2016 on sustainable forest management for people and biodiversity, where I have to admit I learned a lot about the status of local knowledge of Fiji's biodiversity. I'm not talking about knowledge of biodiversity, but our own people and the status of our local knowledge of Fiji's biodiversity, the wealth of research that went into developing some of our policies. This means that we have some really good policies in place. And now I have come to appreciate the need to engage the right sectors to address Fiji's biodiversity crisis so that we can have an appropriate localized approach. The next slide, please, Etika. For Fiji, 99% of all our plants and animals are found in our forests. That are found in our forests are found only in Fiji and nowhere else in the world. This is a really special ecosystem, our forest. This places the forest ecosystem as an important home for Fiji's biodiversity. And just some case in point there is the Fiji flying fox. It's found only in Fiji, nowhere else in the world, and in the highlands of Taveuni. The orange dove, the tangimothea, many of these, but the sad reality is that we don't have much ecological data or knowledge of these species. And as we lose more of our forests, we also lose our connection to these species, some of which are totem animals in the Itoke culture, in the Fijian culture. And so forest ecosystems are not only home to Fiji's unique biodiversity, but they're also a source of free ecosystem services that our communities receive. Next slide, please, Etika. Fiji's forest, our silent provider, if you look at our water cycle, this is a very basic concept of it that Deb had alluded to earlier. Where does our water come from? It comes from our cloud forests. Basically, the water from the ocean evaporates into the air that's blown by wind and blown across our high islands like Viti Levu, Vanua Levu, to our cloud forests like we have in Korombamba and Mount Tomanivi, Mount Victoria. And in there are special filmy ferns, which convert this cloud into water. And then that is what trickles down into the waterfalls, comes down through the soil into springs, goes down into our river systems and back out into the ocean to complete our water cycle. And so this, without our cloud forest and our forest, we would lose a lot of the river, a lot of the water that we have in our rivers. Next slide, please, Etika. And this is the typical thing of what a cloud forest looks like that you saw earlier before. It's very soft, it's spongy when you walk through it, and you can wet your hands on the trunk of a tree. And then the basic concept here is that that water is what we receive in our taps, particularly for our rural communities. Next slide, please. And next one, Itika. And so we receive our free ecosystem services in the research that we've done as part of our Darwin project. We found that a lot of the women, particularly in the rural areas, have a very strong dependence on the forest for firewood. Women have to walk further now to get firewood. They still use water from the rivers for washing, for drinking, and these are services that our forests provide for free without having to pay anything. And this is something that is greatly underappreciated for a lot of us, particularly for those who live very close to these forest systems. Next slide, please, Etika. Here's some data on Fiji's biodiversity. You see the next slide. If you could just click twice, please. And what will come up is the fact that Fiji has over 4,000 different species of insects, ants, and the cicada, this particular cicada here, which is on our $100 bill. Fiji is unique in global terms in the fact that this cicada, in the US, we have the 17-year-old cicada and the 13-year-old cicada that stay underground for 17 years to 13 years before they emerge out of the ground and to breed before they finally go back into the ground. And the next one after that is Fiji with its 8-year-old cicada, the Nanai. And then the next one after that is India with its 4-year-old cicada. And so this places Fiji in a unique place in terms of the cicadas. And what's really interesting is that Fiji is it's supposed to be an oceanic island, and yet we have this insect that's found only on the island of Viti Levu and only in certain parts of Viti Levu, and has traditional folklore relations with the people of Navosa in Serua and Namosi. It's a delicacy for them, and it's got a unique life cycle, and it's really, really special, and it's there on our $100 bill. So Fiji's biodiversity is quite special, quite unique. And this is forest-based species, and this is the only periodic in the Southern Hemisphere. All the other species occur in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you, Tika. Next slide. If you look at our freshwater fishes, we have around 164 species of fish in Fiji, and according to research that has been done by some master students like Devon Bossetto, and also been done by Aaron Jenkins and Lekima Copeland, the endemism at stream level is quite high. In Waitavala Creek on the island of Taveuni, there's a species of fish there that's found only in that creek and nowhere else on the island of Taveuni. And some of our fishes have this amphidromous life cycle, where they need a part of their life needs to be in the marine ecosystem, and they swim all the way upstream to the headwaters And so they need to have clean pathways from the sea all the way up to the highlands, like in Tomanivi and in other high waters in Fiji. And the gobies have special pelvic fins that allow them to stick onto rocks, and they can climb over waterfalls. They can swim upstream in rapidly flowing streams, and fish migration pathways are important. And this is where gravel extraction, unsustainable agricultural methods, and unsustainable logging can have impacts on their survival. Next slide, please, Itika. If you look at Fiji species that are listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, if you look at the table that's there on your right, you have the reptiles, the mollusks, the mammals, the birds, and the fish. And you'll notice that in blue are the species, the number of species that are critically endangered, and then in orange are the number that are endemic to Fiji, that are found only in Fiji. And almost all of our species that are critically endangered, that means they're at high risk of extinction, are actually the ones that are found in our forests. And so this makes our forest ecosystem even more important as a place where we can save our species. And there is no one else that we can depend on as a nation to look after this but ourselves. Next presentation, please. Next slide, please. In 2007, Mrs. Suliani Siwatimbao and Annette Lees had produced a study on Fiji's conservation sector. And they had stated in that presentation that we have a biodiversity crisis in Fiji, where up to that point, we'd lost, in the 15 years, we'd lost 70,000 hectares of natural forest. And according to the NBCEP 2020, we've lost 140,000 hectares of natural forest. And I'm not talking about plantation forest. This is native forest from which we receive these key ecosystem services. And the Fiji Red Plus driver study in 2018 actually confirms this data, and the Darwin project that we implemented looking at the Fiji forest policy confirmed even more the need to make sure that the Environment Management Act and the Fiji forest policy and other science-fed policies that have been developed in Fiji needs to be shared widely, needs to be socialized within the community. And just in the next slide, you'll see examples of two species that are now critically endangered. That's the Kavau Ningau, that's found only on the island of Ngau. And in the next slide is the Kulawai, or the red-throated lorikeet. This is Fiji's most endangered forest bird. The last time it was seen was in 1993. And we've been searching for it in the forest of Vitilevu. Last year, we went to the island of Taveuni, hoping that Taveuni, being where we have the forest reserve and the nature reserve and a lot of native forest, would be the refuge for it. And we're still hoping that we'll find it there if we can raise funds to look for it again this year. Next slide, please. And if we lose our forests, if we don't manage our forests properly, we lose the very basic thing that we receive from our forest, which is clean drinking water. I think the PS for Agriculture had mentioned earlier in his presentation today that conservation is key to making sure that we have good agricultural produce in Fiji. And there's a key link between having a biodiverse forest, a good intact forest, and having good agricultural products or diverse agricultural products that can feed the nation. And just some case studies of this is looking at our bats. Etika, if you can do it, I think at least 3 times, there are 3 things that'll come up. And this, I've done it as a traffic light indicator. So in green there is the Nakanavangi. This is Fiji's only bat sanctuary that was finally established in 2018 and is managed and owned by the National Trust of Fiji. And this particular species of bat is an insectivorous bat, and we share this with Vanuatu. And in orange there are sites where even though for the island of Taveuni, there is protection of the sites, and island of Vatuvara, and here in Vitilevu, the Kalambu Cave, the Wainimbuku Cave, the Wailotua Cave, and the Tatumba Caves, even though we know that they exist, for some of these sites, we've begun to lose some species of bats. And one particularly important one is the one in red in Nangeta Island. This is Emballonura-Semicaudata, the Pacific she-tailed bat, which is on the first picture on the right. This particular bat has disappeared from the island of Fiangeta. And we know that there's a stronghold in the La group. It's disappeared from Viti level, probably from Vanua level, but we know there's still some populations persisting in Taveuni. And sadly, a paper that was just published last year suggested that it has now become extinct from the island of Rotuma, where it was also found in huge numbers. And a PhD study being undertaken by Sitire Tekoda is going into understanding more about the Fiji free-tailed bat, but also looking at how our insectivorous bats can contribute to the agriculture sector in controlling insect populations, because in other parts of the world, insectivorous bats play an important role in controlling agricultural pests within an agriculture system. Now, this particular bat, Emballonura-Semicaudata, Pacific she-tailed bat, I know has disappeared from Samoa. And there was some linkages between the heavy agricultural activity, the use of pesticides, and then being hammered by several cyclones that probably drove the population down. And we're not sure of the status of that particular species. And for the last one at the bottom there, which is the Fiji blossom bat, of which we have caves on Viti level and Vanua level, what is really interesting about this one is that it's a blossom bat, so it feeds on nectar. And there are studies ongoing about its special relationship with a plant called kuluva. So our plants and animals have evolved in such a way that they have intricate relationships, in that the flower of the kuluva will not open until the Fiji blossom bat comes and cuts it open, and then it'll begin to bloom. And so that's how intimate the relationships are between our native animals and our native plants, and how we need to make sure that these spaces are protected through the high conservation valley forest and key biodiversity areas. Next slide, please. Just another case study to highlight here is the Fiji sago palm. If you just click twice, they tick, I think two text boxes will come up. And so traditionally, historically, this covered thousands of acres in the land from Rewa Delta all the way to the Navua Delta. And some coring work that was done in 2009 showed that these particular species of sago palm, Metroxylon vitians, dominated a lot of our systems in Fiji, and it started to disappear with the arrival of human beings around 3000 BP. And now to date, our assessment in 2008 found that we only have 15 sites, of which there's only 450 hectares of sago forest. Next slide, please. And this is a classic example of a species that, that has been lost. We've lost majority of its population through the drainage of wetlands, through the agriculture scheme, Wenika level and Donguru drainage schemes, the subdivision and drainage of the Ndakuni Koro farm, over 200 hectares of this native forest, native species, endemic species was lost. And then it has been compounded further by the heart of palm trade, which in 2008, a study that we commissioned showed that they kill 200 trees per week for this trade. Now, why is it special? This tree is special because it is found only in Fiji and nowhere else in the world. And one sago palm tree takes up to 30 years to grow before it finally flowers, and then it fruits, and then it dies. And that's it for its life cycle. And there is unsustainable harvesting of this particular palm tree, species of sago palm. And it was Isaac Round's thesis in 2007 that was the first scientific study into putting this on the IUCN Red List, and then it enabled the implementation of a species recovery plan. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just check on your time, Naka.
Okay. All right. Next slide. I'm almost done here. And so this is one of the species recovery plan, and then it's an ongoing program that has involved multiple stakeholders. In terms of how much has been brought in to implement species conservation action and research, there's a paper that says that we should be investing $65,000 per species per year to save them from the brink of extinction. So far, we've brought in NatureFiji as an organization from 2007 to 2019, only 18,457 per year per species. So there's a lot more investment that needs to go into species conservation action, not just research. Next slide, please, Etika. And some of the key drivers of biodiversity loss is the conversion of habitat, forest loss, invasive species or mammalian predators, and even more important is our own local ownership of the biodiversity crisis. Next slide, please, Etika. And what we are part of the solution, and we can take ownership of Fiji's biodiversity crisis. There are many ways that we can provide solutions. We can invest in building local experts in ecology, roll out and implement the Fiji Forest Policy, enforce the Fiji Environment Management Act, Fiji Endangered and Protected Species Act, and have local ownership of the biodiversity crisis. It is good to note that some national initiatives championed by the Ministry of Environment in this regard, including the National Dialogue on Boost Nature Positive Production. And then we also have the BioDev project that's just been rolled out. Fiji is fortunate to be one of the countries to do this, because whilst the IT target puts forward challenge to halt biodiversity loss, it did not really look at the drivers of biodiversity loss and how to tackle this issue. So this BioDev project is an opportunity for sectors to talk about how they view their contributions towards biodiversity loss and mitigation measures that they can realistically implement to reduce their contribution to biodiversity loss. And I sincerely look forward to talking to some of you here today in this session on how we can together put together the data to help our sectors commit towards reducing biodiversity loss for Fiji. And if you just do the next two slides, and just to highlight that this is based on the IUCN Red List of threatened species and the importance of having our key biodiversity areas as special places for Fiji's biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Nunia, thank you very much for a very detailed, informed presentation. We could also hear your passion in the work that NatureFiji is doing. Just on behalf of the participants, thank you very much for sharing all this great work and case studies, and just the importance for us to be aware of our other part of the population that are living in our forest and providing for us. To all the participants, we'll move to our next and last presenter. We are pretty okay on time. Hope we'll have more discussion. If I could invite the presentation from the economic private sector, the Fiji Pine Limited, Ashiana Hassan, the manager operation. Hassan, welcome. If you could now share with us your presentation, Hassan.
Pula Pinaka, Mr. Etika, and welcome to the other presenters. You can see that we have a set of people here with us, but we'll just go straight forward on our presentation since we are running out of time. Could you please confirm if you can hear me out?
Yes, we are hearing you clearly, and your presentation is also on the screen.
Okay, just to begin with, I'll just briefly update you people on our industry. I'm here to represent the Pine Group of companies, that is the Fiji Pine Limited with its two other entities, that is Tropik Wood Industries and Tropik Wood Products. Fiji Pine Limited, it was established by the government of Fiji, and it was actually to generate economic activities in the rural areas. However, the areas which were used to create this plantation was the Talasinga grasslands, and the beneficiaries are the pine landowners. The forest estate which we have is around 83,000 hectares. with a total stocked area of 28,425. The other entities are Tropik Wood Industries based in Drasa, Lautoka. We are actually the largest sawmiller in Fiji and have been exporting wood chips since 1987 and are independent power producer. Tropik Wood Products, on the other hand, is the company and mill situated in Wairiki on the other island, Vanuatu, and they are a solely 100% revenue is from the sale of pine wood chip to Japan and China, and has been exporting since 2012. Mainstreaming biodiversity into economic sectors. For our company, when we were able to mainstream the biodiversity, the environmental factors to our sector was actually through the forest certification, which took place in 2013. But prior to that, we have been working on this for 2 years, that is 2011 to 2013. We have been working on this certification, and we were able to get certified in 2013. Why we chose FSC was because FSC was a recognized award, and internationally recognized award for pine plantations, timber products, and wood chips, and it marks the responsible forestry. The manufacture of end products under chain of custody, that is the procedures ensures that we have an unbroken chain from the seedlings to the production of wood chips and the pine timber products. So the chain of custody identified and separated from non-certified materials as it makes its way along the supply chain from the plantation all the way through the end products. We have principles where we go through these forest certifications, and the principles are 1 to 10 principles. I'll be focusing mainly on the principles number 6 and number 9. I'll skip some slides and just go on to 6 and 9, where we are talking about environment and biodiversity. Actually, all the other principles are also interlinked, but environment is a separate principle for under FSC certification, and under environment impact, we do the we have sections to conserve biological diversity, to sorry. What happens under this principle is that we do conserve biological diversity, water resources, protect the rare threatened species, ecological functions, adopt to environment-friendly, non-chemical pest management methods, proper waste disposal in the forest, and forest conversion to be avoided. When we are saying forest conversion to be avoided, is that FSC principle, it states that we are not supposed to certify any land which has been converted after 1992 in Fiji, conversion of native forest to plantation forest. So for FPL, we do not fall into these categories, since most of our plantation is on the dry grassland areas. The principle number 9, it speaks on the high conservation value forest. When we were working on this principle with our forest and our group, we came to know that there were no national data present for us to look back and get it into our system to conserve these areas. So Fiji Pine, with other stakeholders, other consultations, we went through to get this aspect of certification done on our own, and we use the WWF toolkit to identify, mark, and evaluate the categories under HCBFs of biological, ecological, and social importance. And what happened for us, we have almost around 67 to 68 sites which we are protecting within our 82,000 hectares of leased land, and most of it are of social and ecological importance, very rare on biological importance. But yes, we do have natural forest, and we are still protecting it from fragmentation or other activities involved in our presentation. Principle 10 is basically whatever we do from principle 1 to 10. It consolidates everything and gets us to report to our certifier. And every year we are being evaluated and audited on our certification, which is renewed yearly. And this gives us the certificate renewed and gives the platform for us to be a social responsible forestry company. While while presenting to the group here on this platform, while we are were talking about our certification, I would also like to highlight that our brand name is known as Tropik Pine, and we would like to market our products out in the other countries. So if you could contact the details on the screen, and we can forward you our product details. Vinaka.
Thank you very much, Fiji Pine, for a very informative presentation. Congratulations for taking our industry to the forest stewardship certification process. And it's good to see that we are aligning with some of the global standards in the industry. Hi everyone, that brings us to the end of our presentations. We'll now open to the questions to the presenters. I'm just going through some of the questions. Nunia, I know you covered it already. What are the major causes of loss of native forest? If you can maybe generally to the others comment on the enforcement issues on our forest. There are some specific questions on, if we could just give it to the speakers, if you could just talk about some, I guess, since the discussion is on threats from the industry sector, from the conservation and the Ministry of Forestry, if you could maybe further discuss some of these major threats you're dealing with.
Sanjana, do you want to go first, or Deb?
I don't need to. And also Conservator and LPS is just joined as well.
Okay. So if I may invite the Permanent Secretary Forestry, Penny, thank you very much for joining us. If you could maybe add any comments there. The question discussion is on what are the major costs. I think one of our big challenge really is how we will curb the loss of our forest, specifically on the native forest.
Oleh Bu Tika, And ladies and gentlemen, a pleasure to join you a bit late. But yes, I believe you would have heard from Deborah, essentially the new thinking behind the management of Fiji's forest resources. It's nothing entirely new. It's an effort that we've, even our predecessors have been trying to get us to have a balance in our forest utilization and forest conservation for biodiversity enhancement and protection purposes. Right now, there's the opportunity ahead of us. There's a need for all of us to be talking to one another, to be listening to each other, and to make some tangible action on the ground. I'm sure Deborah in her presentation would have spoken to you about the way that we need to develop a profile on Fiji's forests, and I've seen the many maps that she has shown you. It's one of the processes that we need to undertake in order to have a better appreciation of our forests and how important it is to all the various aspects of biodiversity. And of course, I'm happy with Nunia's presentation. She is emphasizing the importance of the forest policy and its implementation. This is work in progress. It's never going to happen overnight, trying to totally protect our forests. But essentially, many of you would have heard of Fiji's tree planting revolution. That is part of the solution. We've got to be planting more trees than what we are harvesting already. I'm not sure if you're aware that Fiji is losing about 4,000 hectares of forest annually. And so we have a great responsibility to recover or to replenish the forests that we have lost. But you, of course, also aware that we need to grow the economy. So part of the way forward is really to support our plantation forests. I'm happy with the presentation from Fiji Pine. There's another key stakeholder in Fiji's forestry sector, the Fiji Hardwood Corporation Limited, which deals with mahogany plantations. There's a real need for Fiji, for people like us, to be able to support the plantation forest, the development, the proper management, the way it's sustainably managed. It's important for our economic growth, for the young people, for economy. That is critical. It's something that we cannot shy away from. And while we are doing that with our tree planting, the part of the efforts on tree planting is to also plant our native trees, as many as possible, and eventually to protect as much as possible, to protect the native forests. And that is where we can cater for the biodiversity needs. That's the kind of thinking that we have with the Ministry of Forests. As I said, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's all the more reason why all of us need to be talking to one another, helping to develop a strategy for Fiji that's unique for Fiji, learning from our friends from abroad, and that's the opportunity that we now have moving forward. Now,
thank you, everyone. I think the message in terms, there's not much question coming through to all the speakers. There are just three emphases and the support PS, Mr. Penny and the Ministry of Forestry, that the need to support the planting of trees, of the loss of our forest. As you mentioned, Mr. PS, the 4,000 per year, and then Nunia also mentioned the assessment of the loss. I think 70,000, the figure that Nunia mentioned that we've lost since the last, I think it's the NBSEP to 2020, 70 to 140. So that's the challenge, but it's great to see that we are part of the solution. And the rehabilitation process. Can I invite any other comments from the other speakers, Nunia and Debbie?
Yes, Etika, if I may. one of the key things that Deb presented on was our high conservation value forests, and the establishment of protected areas. And nationally we have a target. So whilst we have other areas where we are doing sustainable forest management, within the permanent forest escape landscape, we need to look at areas that we need to protect and make sure that it never gets converted to another form of land use. Already, we have the important bird areas identified. We have the key biodiversity areas that we are looking to relook at this year. And some of the important things that are coming out, particularly from seeing what's happening on the ground, and this is why I had those questions about Kava earlier, is the conversion of a lot of our secondary forest post harvesting, and some of our native forest into cover plantation. It's the indiscriminate expansion of these small-scale agricultural farmers and the fragmentation of these habitats. That is a huge worry for us because as I mentioned earlier, our plants and animals have evolved with a very special relationship with each other. And for some of our bat caves that have been abandoned, they were abandoned because the microclimate within the cave changed. And so the bats abandoned that. They're very sensitive to any changes in the cave. And this can be caused by humans entering it, building fires inside or using it as a rubbish dump. And that's what causes the bats to abandon their caves. And there's research that suggests that if we lose all our bats and all our birds like the songe our native birds, we lose our forests because they are the seed dispersers. They are the pollinators. They are the reason that we have our native forests in the first place. So there is a need to maintain our intact forest and then to manage where we'll have our plantation and harvesting so that they can continue to support the biodiversity that can support the ecological functions and the ecosystem services that we receive from these systems. That's why, agroforestry and other mechanisms that can ensure that there is no biodiversity loss is really important. And so the BioDev project that IUCN and the Ministry of Environment are leading on is really important for that because it's an opportunity for us to look at some of the threats to our biodiversity and then look at how we can mitigate these threats and reduce our impacts on biodiversity loss.
Thank you very much, Nunia. I'd like to also add on to what I presented. And I forgot to say to emphasize on native species in our food forestry, for example, but also I'd like to highlight the 10 golden rules for restoring forests. This was developed by various scientists around the world and published by the Kew Gardens earlier in the year. So it's about also protecting existing forests first, as well as putting the local people at heart for the tree planting projects, maximizing biodiversity recovery to meet multiple goals, selecting the right area for reforestation, using natural forest regrowth whenever possible, selecting the right tree species that can maximize biodiversity, and to make sure that the trees are resilient to adapting to climate change, planning ahead, like a national land use planning, but also endorsed at Matangali level, and also learn by doing and making it pay. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Fiji Pine, any other additional comments? Yeah?
Tika, this is Sanjana from Forestry. If I may, just add on to what PS Forestry and Deborah and Nunia had alluded to earlier. Streamlining or mainstreaming biodiversity into economic sectors, it requires a collaborative effort, as mentioned by PS Agriculture as well. There's a lot of players in the different types of land users, and unless and until we come together and plan well for how we want to use land in Fiji, some of these issues cannot be resolved. as mentioned by PS also, that you can't do it overnight. And there's an urgent need for a land use plan. It's not just a rural land use plan. If you're thinking of urban forestry as well, we need a land management plan for all of Fiji. Just to mention just a few stats that over the past 3 decades, we have seen a decline in harvesting from native forests. Currently, the two largest companies, Fiji Pine and Fiji Hardwood, Pine and Mahogany, are actually contributing to about 90% of the returns from our forest, from our plantations, or from our sector. And the harvesting from native forest has declined from over 200 cubic meters to now 30,000 cubic meters per year or annually. So there's some efforts being placed. The growing plantations are also easing the burden on native forests. And now we need to work really closely with agriculture and environment to ensure that the forests that are still there are managed sustainably, so that we are able to maintain the biodiversity and ensure returns to the landowners as well. One such initiative is the RED Plus project. Now we are going into an emission reduction project program that will see that this initiative of conserving trees as carbon offsets. So they will be paid accordingly. So that's another incentive there that's going to add on to the maintenance of biodiversity, as we are here to talk about today. And yeah, so those are some of the things I wanted to mention. And I think the main reason we have plantations is so that we try and protect native forests as much as possible. Thank you.
Valuable Sanjana. I think we'll bring this group session discussion. Anjana, just also a reminder from Department of Environment, Ministry of Environment, that all commercial logging are required to do EIAs. Thank you for sharing the good news that native species harvesting have dropped, and that shows the impact of the industries in their efforts and the RED Plus program. So everyone, that brings us to the closing part of this. If I may, I will just share the what we'll have is have Tabenisa Luisa, who is the program leader for the BioDev, just to give us some summary slides on the key messages that have come through. And then after that, we'll have Mr. Mason Smith, Regional Director for IUCN, to say some thank you and close up this virtual meeting. Let me just share our slide for Tabenisa to. So that is our photo slide that Epeli took. Thank you very much, Epeli. I'll pass it on now to Tabenisa to go through our summary slide.
Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, Tabe, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. As Etika mentioned, I'm under the project BioDev 2030, and I would like to thank everyone for participating in this platform in terms of the mainstreaming of biodiversity into the economic sectors. This is like the initial stage of our discussions. The project will later invite everyone also for the second stage of discussions. This will include a range of stakeholders. So with that, I'll just go through whatever we've discussed, some of the key points that we've discussed today in terms of the waste management and pollution control, some of the good initiative that is coming from our sectors in terms of waste plastic, recycling, also awareness also has been pursued to schools, communities, programs. Also the South Pacific Waste Recyclers also share this recycling initiative and also open for dialogues for other recycling of other products. And in terms of the Ministry of Environment, we would like to thank them. They have also the key biodiversity policies mandated under the ministries, and also they've identified threats to biodiversity, which is also highlighted in their key policies and strategies, such as the NBCEP 2020, the 6th National Report, and I think the upcoming State of the Environment Report 2021, I hope, but I think it's not yet released. So thankful for that. So these are sort of this information that will be used to identify the threats to biodiversity, and also to talk more, and also with our sectors, so that we can have a robust way forward. Can we have the next slide? In terms of agriculture, we have importance highlighted by Tete Vioni in terms of how we have symbiotic relationship above and below the soil for biological sustainable farming, which is really essential for rebuilding soil, and also the shift to organic farming, which is really important, and also increasing functional biodiversity in agriculture system for positive environment outcome. Also addresses the importance of agro-biodiversity. We should tap into that more for sustainable environment. And most importantly is the awareness, not only to our stakeholders, but to our communities and the general public in terms of sustainable fishing practice. And I thank our colleague from Sea Change using various platforms to share sustainable fishing practice awareness to our stakeholders and the general public at large. Tika, can I have the next slide? In terms of forest sustainability, the forest bioeconomy, permanent forest estate, and also the important aspect of agroforestry, which is encouraged through demonstration sites and self-sustaining. Also incentives to be explored with the products produced. Urban forestry, interesting section there. We have safe and strong communities, so wealthier and fairer communities. Greener communities, healthier and smarter communities. We've also noted, thanks to Nunia, a very diverse range of information in terms of our endangered and endemic species, and that's also highlighted in the IUCN Red List, where it's found to be critically and endangered, especially in our forest ecosystem. And also that's also highlighted the biodiversity crisis in Fiji in terms of forest loss, and very importantly, the species conservation is we need to address that. So overall, I thank everyone for their contribution. Like I mentioned, this is not only the end stage. We'll be having further consultation in terms of how we can better address sustainability in working with the stakeholders, the sectors, the organization in terms of mainstreaming of biodiversity into your sectors. So BioDev project 2030 has engaged consultant, which is NatureFiji-MareqetiViti, and the team of consultants they had, experts. So they've undergoing consultation and also research in terms of the threats to biodiversity. So this is sort of information also for them to gauge and also to talk more in terms of how we can address this crisis. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tabanisa. We've come to the end of the virtual meeting. If I may invite Mr. Mason Smith to say a few words of thank you to close the meeting.
Thank you, Etika. Colleagues, allow me to first of all thank our speakers this morning. No doubt they bring a lot of expertise and experience to the discussion this morning. Also thank the 80 or so participants that's been with us for the past few hours. And of course, our hosts, Etika and Tabanisa, and the team for getting us through to the end state. I guess my question now is, what now? Where do we go from here? If we're going to be part of the solution, then I think we must understand the stock take that we've done today and have a look at some of the issues that we need to address, not only in our individual 2021 work plan, but also reaching out, as the Permanent Secretary for Forests has said, trying to establish partnerships, trying to establish collaborative efforts right across the spectrum to ensure that we are part of the solution and that we are mainstreaming biodiversity into the various economic sectors. So the challenge I pose to you now is, when we meet again at about the same time next year, it will be good to get from all our participants what they have done insofar as being part of the solution to this biodiversity crisis that we face. So that's the challenge that I leave with you now. We've done a very quick stock take over the past few hours. We've challenged ourselves to be part of the solution. Now I encourage us to go out, plan and act on being part of the solution. Again, let me close by thanking everyone for their participation this morning, and I hope to be in touch with you over the next couple of months as we work together and being part of the solution to the challenges and threats posed by the loss of biodiversity, not only in Fiji, but in the region. So with that, Vinaka Bakalevu, and a blessed and safe weekend to each and every one of you. Vinaka.
Thank you.